Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking beyond, traditional conflicts, traditional battle lines. We're diving into something called hybrid threats. It's complex stuff. Think of cyber attacks, disinformation, even things like migration being used as tools, weaponized, really.
Exactly. It's this murky, multi-layered challenge.
Mm.
And our main guide for this exploration is the 2025 DIA Worldwide Threat Assessment.
Right, the Defense Intelligence Agency's take.
Yes. And it's not just theory. It's their analysis of current and emerging dangers.
Mm.
What really jumps out is, well, two things. How fast advanced technology is changing the game,
Okay.
and how certain countries, competitors, are increasingly working together, cooperating in ways that are, frankly, quite concerning.
So our mission here, for you listening, is to kind of unpack what the DIA sees as the key parts of these hybrid threats. We want to understand how these different areas, cyber, space, conventional forces, tech, how they all interact, and who the players are, countries, groups, and how they interact. Where's the best place to start untangling this?
Well, I think a really crucial starting point, something the DIA report definitely highlights, is this growing cooperation, specifically among nations looking to challenge U.S. influence. We're mainly talking China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
Right.
It's not just that they individually pose challenges, it's that they're increasingly coordinating, finding common ground to push back against the U.S. and support each other's goals.
It sounds almost like well, maybe not a formal alliance like NATO, but a sort of strategic alignment.
That's a good way to put it, a strategic alignment. The report suggests Russia's war in Ukraine has really accelerated this trend.
How so?
Well, they're helping each other out more in conflicts, backing each other in places like the UN, finding ways around sanctions, putting collective pressure on the West. Even if there are underlying tensions between them, and there probably are, they seem to be putting those aside for now to focus on shared military security intelligence objectives.
Okay, let's dig into that cooperation. What are some specific examples the DIA points to?
One major one is the China-Russia partnership. It's still going strong. Beijing's been careful, not sending overt lethal aid to Russia that would trigger big sanctions.
Mm.
But they're still providing significant support. High-level meetings are constant. They work together in BRICS, ASEAN, the UN. And we've seen things like combined air and sea patrols, even near the Arctic. That's not insignificant.
No, that sends a clear message about their strategic alignment. What about the others involved? Iran, North Korea?
Russia, obviously under pressure from the war,
Yeah.
is leaning more heavily on them. The report says North Korea has supplied huge amounts of artillery, ballistic missiles,
Right.
maybe even troops.
Cut troops. Really?
That's what the assessment suggests is possible. And Iran, of course, continues providing those armed drones, the UAVs. But what's really concerning, and the DIA flags this, is what Russia might be giving back.
Okay.
They seem to be sharing more sensitive tech, space tech, nuclear know-how, missile technology with China, Iran, and North Korea. That could seriously speed up WMD programs down the line for some of these countries.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's destabilizing. And what do North Korea and Iran get out of it besides maybe the tech?
Well, for North Korea, besides the tech access, they're likely getting Russian military help in return. Things like advanced air defense systems, maybe the S-822s mentioned, electronic warfare gear. And last year, they signed that big, comprehensive strategic partnership that includes defense commitments. It shows how deep it's getting.
Right.
Iran, meanwhile, probably wants advanced weapons like fighter jets from China. But its cooperation with Russia helps its own military space program. Plus, they're both developing technologies that could, shorten the path to an ICBM. And working together helps both deal with sanctions and diplomatic isolation.
So it's this really tangled web of mutual needs and shared objectives against essentially the West and the U.S. Now, the report also talks about threats closer to home, the U.S. homeland itself, even the southern border. How does that fit into this hybrid picture?
Yeah, this is where things get a bit blurred, right? Between traditional security and these newer hybrid methods. The homeland faces threats from these big state competitors, sure, but also from non-state actors. Missile threats are still a major concern. China, Russia, North Korea are all improving their arsenals. We're talking hypersonics, better ICBMs, designed specifically to get past our defenses.
And the terrorism threat hasn't gone away?
No, definitely not. The report says it's still dynamic, kind of spread out. Groups like ISIS, they likely still want to pull off big attacks in the West. And the report mentions arrests of people with possible ISIS links coming through the southern border. There was that ISIS-inspired attack in New Orleans. It highlights how borders can be Well, potential vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Maybe not a primary military tactic for a state, but something that creates distractions, uses resources, something adversaries could exploit.
Yeah, it really shows how connected everything is. The report also mentions unmanned systems, UCASS. That feels like a huge growth area for threats.
Oh, absolutely. The DIA is pretty clear. The threat from drones and other unmanned systems is just going to grow. Why? They're getting cheaper, easier to get, and the tech is advancing incredibly fast.
So anyone could potentially use them.
Increasingly, yes. Hostile actors, states or non-states, could use them to deliver weapons, or just for spying on critical infrastructure, military bases. And what's really worrying is when you combine UXS with other tech AI, big data, IoT devices, 5G networks, that makes them potentially much, much more powerful and harder to counter.
And going back to the southern border for a second, beyond terrorism, how else does that factor in?
Well, the report notes how the flow of illegal migration, driven by difficult conditions in Central and South America, can be exploited, not just by potential terrorists, but definitely by transnational criminal organizations.
The cartels.
Exactly. The cartels pose a massive threat on their own, especially with fentanyl. The flow might fluctuate, but they're still pumping cocaine and meth across too. These groups have networks, infrastructure, influence inside the U.S.
Yeah.
That infrastructure, well, it's a vulnerability that other hostile actors could potentially tap into or leverage.
So it's about adversaries potentially using existing criminal networks and migration flows as another vector in this hybrid conflict. Okay, let's pivot back to technology then. The report seems to put tech right at the center of all this.
It really does. The DIA is explicit that advances in AI, biotech, quantum, microchips, space, cyber, unmanned systems. They're all fundamentally changing the threat landscape. And our adversaries know it. They see these technologies as key to boosting their military power across the board.
Can you give us some specifics on how this tech race is playing out?
Well, China's push is a big one. It's state-led, massive investment to dominate these critical tech fields. The PLA, their military, is actively integrating AI, advanced computing, etc. They're even, according to the report, actively trying to get intellectual property from DoD-funded research here in the U.S.
Wow, and Russia.
Russia has the ambitions too, but sanctions are definitely hurting their progress in developing some of these advanced military technologies.
Yeah.
But the tricky part with a lot of this tech is that it's dual use. Biological sequencers for medical research, sure,
Yeah.
but also potentially for bioweapons, AI for optimizing logistics, great. Also for autonomous weapons or cyber attacks, nanotech, same story.
You mentioned AI. The report talks about its use in Ukraine.
Yes. It's being used right now in drones, for processing intelligence data faster, for cyber warfare, even for creating deepfakes and propaganda using generative AI. It's already on the battlefield.
Oh, quantum computing. That always
Yeah.
sounds like science fiction.
Well, China and Russia are investing heavily in quantum computing and quantum communications. The big fear is breaking current encryption. The report suggests that capability is probably still some years off, maybe not this decade, but they're working on it. And then there's microelectronics computer chips. That's a huge area of competition. China and Russia are desperately trying to become less reliant on chips made by the U.S. and our allies.
It really is a tech arms race, isn't it? Okay, let's talk cyberspace. That seems like the natural home turf for hybrid threats.
Absolutely. It's a core domain. The DIA report details constant efforts by China and Russia using cyber tools for spying, stealing data, getting access to sensitive networks,
Including U.S. government systems?
critical infrastructure.
Yes, both. Think of it as ongoing digital reconnaissance, mapping out networks, looking for vulnerabilities. The idea of an adversary hiding inside our power grid network or water systems, that's obviously deeply concerning. Has that actually happened?
The DIA has been public about Chinese cyber actors doing exactly that, pre-positioning, getting access to critical infrastructure networks. The worry is they could flip a switch, cause disruption or damage if a major conflict looked like it was starting.
Yeah, in Russia.
Russia's very active too. You have state groups like the SVR implicated in major hacks like the Microsoft email breach.
Yeah.
But you also have these sort of non-state pro-Russian groups like the Cyber Army of Russia Reborn that have launched attacks against U.S. water systems, energy companies. So it's a mix of state-sponsored espionage and potentially disruptive attacks, sometimes using proxies. It's a constant, serious threat.
It really makes you realize how vulnerable our connected world is.
Yeah.
What about space? Is that another front in this hybrid conflict?
Definitely. Both China and Russia see space as crucial, and they want to chip away at the U.S.'s advantages there.
Hmm.
China's pouring money into its space capabilities. More satellites for communication, spying, navigation, C5 ISRTs, they call it. They're building huge satellite constellations, aiming to compete with things like Starlink. But it's not just about launching satellites.
What else?
They're developing ways to attack other satellites,
Right.
anti-satellite missiles, jamming systems, even satellites that can physically grab or disable other satellites, like their Shijian-21 demonstrated.
Like space warfare capabilities.
Essentially, yes. And Russia's prioritizing this too. The report mentions that Russian satellite potentially carrying a nuclear device.
That caused a stir earlier this year.
It did. And the U.S. has been watching that program. Apparently, recent intelligence gave a clearer picture of their progress. Russia also vetoed that UN resolution against weapons in space, and they keep testing other counter-space weapons, even non-nuclear ones. They just did a test recently that generated debris concerns.
So space is becoming contested, even weaponized. Okay, one last area the report touches on. Foreign intelligence threats. How is that changing?
The intelligence threat is getting more complex, largely because advanced tech is cheaper and more available. It's not just the big players anymore. Things like ubiquitous technical surveillance, just the sheer amount of digital data being generated and collected globally makes it harder to protect DoD personnel and operations. And adversaries are using less traditional methods too, like potentially tasking foreign academics or even tourists visiting the U.S. to gather information.
And using technology for spying here.
Absolutely. Things like safe city surveillance systems being sold globally, facial recognition tech, even just tracking data from smart devices. All of that can be used to monitor U.S. personnel, military movements, critical facilities. It's a much more pervasive intelligence threat than ever before.
It really paints a picture of, well, a very complex, interconnected threat landscape. You've got military, tech, cyberspace, intelligence all blending together. And these different actors, particularly China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, increasingly working together just adds another layer of complexity. That's the heart of it, isn't it? Hybrid threats aren't just one thing. It's the convergence, the combination of all these different activities, often coordinated, and that growing cooperation, that alignment among competitors that the 2025 DIA assessment focuses on, really amplifies the challenge for the U.S. and its allies.
So as we wrap up this deep dive based on the DIA's assessment, it definitely gives you, the listener, a lot to process. When you consider how tangled these threats are across cyber, space, technology, even down to our borders and internal networks, it raises some big questions. What do you think are the most critical weak points the U.S. needs to shore up to really handle this kind of hybrid warfare effectively in the next few years? And maybe think about the role of the private sector, too. How are companies, tech firms, both potentially contributing to these risks and essential in helping to mitigate them? It's a huge puzzle and one that clearly needs ongoing focus.